Okay, so we're going to begin by installing Java here. So the Java Development Toolkit, actually, the JDK, which will also install the JRE, the Java Runtime Environment, when you install the development kit. Um, Now there's a couple different ways of doing this here. One of the ways is to get all the binaries, and they're often in tar.gz. You'd have to untar them and install them manually. That's one way of doing it. Another way is through RPM-based Linux platforms such as Red Hat and SUSE. I used to do all my stuff in Red Hat Linux years ago, and I always installed using the RPM method. Now I don't use Red Hat and I don't use the RPM method. But as you'll see from this video, there's lots of times several different ways of installing things. Now, in the Debian-based, which is what Ubuntu is, it talks about how to install that, and here's an example of the RPM-E and whatever that package name is, or to uninstall it. RPM-IVH, the I is for install, and again, it all depends on which version you're talking about here. So these are generic notes. You notice they're based on the version 8 of the JDK. Now, I was running a program here in my one computer, Java, and it happens to be the program's name is Create MySQL Users. You'll see I've got an error message that says Java is not found, but it tells me exactly how I can install that. And then notice it says default JRE. Now that's the runtime. That's not the development kit. Anyway, what is headless? I just want to mention that briefly. Headless mode is a system configuration which the display device, keyboard, or mouse is lacking. It doesn't sound good, but it's actually good for server applications, much more suitable. Has less dependencies. Anyway, so one of the things you can do is you can just Google and you'll see here's a method for JDK10 that I found online. And so going through the first one here, sudo add app repository ppa linux uprising / java, and of course you say to yourself, what's Linux uprising? Well, that's just another web site that has tools for free open source tools that you could use to install, helps with the source toolkit and so on. Anyway, it's one of the things you can do, and of course it always has the sudo apt-get update, and as I've mentioned, sometimes I use apt-get and sometimes I just use apt. It all depends on what I'm doing, but you'll notice in this case I knew I wanted Java 11, but Java 10 is the version that's currently out there. So I decided I would just change that 10 to an 11 and install it. And of course, in this case, you have to accept the license agreement from Oracle. Now, the installation of that default set of Java 11 came with a few packages were automatically installed and are no longer required. So, sudo apt auto remove. Notice this one says apt, not apt-get. For our purposes, there's not really any difference. The apt is just the newer method, as we've talked about previously. And you can check what version you have just by typing java-version. Another thing, though, you might want to do is add to your path to make sure that you've got Java, in this case 11 Oracle DB bin is what I needed to add to that. The way I did it is I actually did an export path without a $ equals $path : $Java _home / bin. So that's what gave me that. This is my Java home, and I added the bin to it. Now, another way of installing this here, you can see update JDK 11 now available, so it gives you the way of doing it there. That's another method we could do. A third method would be, in this case, I had a program called add2.java that we're going to take a look at, and I wanted to compile that, so I did Java C for compile in the name of the program. and it gave me an error message that said Java C is not found. Now, remember the other one when I ran Java was saying that the JRE was not found. This is saying the JDK because Java C is the compiler, and that means you're doing development. You're not just running it. So it gives me these 4 commands. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do what it tells me to, and I'm going to install those. Notice it begins with default JDK, and then I install these here. So I begin by sudo apt, not apt-get, because that's what it tells me. Install default JDK. I get that installed, move on to the next line, and so on. And the third line, sudo apt install ECJ. And when I get it all done, I then go run my Java C add2.java, which compiles. I get no error message. My next line, I Java add2 10 and 7, and I get an answer of 17. That appears. I'm all set. Now, what actually happens when I compiled the Java C is it created a class, add2.java. It still exists, but now there's a compiled version add2.class, and that's what you're actually executing when you do Java add2. You're actually executing the class. So Java add2 12 and 7, I end up with 19. Now if I forget the parameters, you'll notice I get an array index out of bounds exception. So that causes a little bit of a problem. The program is very poorly written. So we can take a look at that here. I got some comments in blue that are hard to read here, but I can see that the way this works, the name of the program is add2, so I have a public class add2, and I've got some parentheses there. Public static void main string args. I'm not going to really explain that because if you really want to understand that, you have to pay more money, take another course, and learn it. That's important. We can't just give all this knowledge out for free. So that's the line. And what it says is string 1 and string 2 are both of type string, and they're arguments 0 and 1. Those are arguments on the line. That is the 10 and 7 or the 12 and 7, whatever it is I typed. And in order to get these into integers, I have to take that string and parse it into an integer that turns it into an integer, if you will. And then you can see I just answer equals 1 value plus a 2 value, those variables I just created, which were of type integer. And of course, when you're adding 2 numbers together that are integers, the result's going to be an integer. And we can see here just system.out.println the answer. So that's how that works. Now I've got multiplications the same, except that I'm going to handle some of those errors that we've got. So I've got the same, I've assigned my string values here so they exist, but then I say try 1 string and 2 string equal to arg0 and arg1. The first argument is always argument 0 in an array. So if there's an error, it's going to catch that error, the array index out of bounds exception. And if it finds that, it says, hey, you didn't give me enough parameters. So that's what will happen. Now, once I have that, the next thing I'm going to do is try to parse it. So I try 1 value equals integer.parse int 1 string and integer parse int 2 strings for the second value. I can multiply them together for an answer and get system.out.println the answer. Of course, if it wasn't a number, I'd be catching that number format exception, and I'd just print that one of them is not a number. So that's a couple of simple Java programs that we're going to write in the lab. It's really just going to be what we call monkey see, monkey do, where I give you the program. Actually, that's not quite true. I'm going to give you the mult2 program, and you're going to have to create both the add2 and the mult2.